And so, Rupeni, if I could hand it to you to take us on through your nature versus nurture.
Thank you, Tevita. Just yes, just basing things on the study that was being done. Like I mentioned, the initial reason why the study was done was just to pretty much to sort of in a biased way not blame the use of alcohol on a certain type of ethnicity, but rather on explain other factors, for example, like the surroundings. So pretty much the study was the main topic of the study was the influence of alcohol on the indigenous youth. Um, and while we were in the classroom, there was a lot of people of different ethnicities had a lot of jokes, a lot of comments to make during this topic. Of course, I don't know. Well, to me, it sounded a little bit racist, especially when they said that Fijians were famous for not holding their liquor and they would resort to violence. So immediately, I sort of took this and as an initiative to also create more awareness on the fact that it's not just Fijians alone that resort to violence during alcohol consumption. So I gave out surveys, and long story short, so in the surveys, it pretty much gave us personality traits, and it was interesting that those who belong to the chief least rank, they seem to have this this leadership role with them, and also they displayed
Charisma.
things like yeah, charisma. So for example, in the document I sent you, it was sort of a psychology question. It's what type of animal would you be, your favorite animal and your least favorite animal. So the animal that you would like to be is how you would like others to see you. The animal that you least like is how people actually see you. So it was interesting that for the Chiefs, the least animal they would like are elephants. But in actual fact, that's how people see them. Now they see that as an insult, but in actual fact, when you see an elephant, it's an
Aggressive elephant in the
intimidating
room.
animal. Yeah, it's an intimidating animal. It stands out in the crowd. They don't know it yet, but this is the part of the brain telling them, well, slowly telling them the type of person that they truly are. So bringing us back to the topic, what I noticed was that violent tendencies would tend to or violent traits, personality traits belong to the warrior clans. And I thought this was maybe a coincidence or maybe because of the environment. In actual fact, this wasn't. These three individuals, they grew up in a higher class suburb here in Fiji, Namadi Heights. Family well financially stable, loving, caring family, awesome neighborhood. But in reality, these were really some really fucked up individuals that had regard no regard for other people's safety, especially when it came to alcohol. It's not that they would go out and look for fights, but in actual fact, they would personally get into a fight and not think twice about it at all. No empathy whatsoever. And it's insane because it's not just one of them. There's actually three individuals. Like I mentioned, yeah, it could be something, could be not, but it was interesting that those who belong to the chiefly system had charisma and all leadership personality characteristics, and those who belong to the warrior clan were very aggressive. So yeah, that's it for me.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in school, I I kind of assumed that the more aggressive classmates and fellow students in my schools were of the warrior class, or I didn't ever have any way to check that. But what I did notice is my classmates and my peers who were the family members of what we call the fofo, which is like the spiritual, more on the spiritual side. They were usually the peacemakers in every situation. That was something that I had noticed in times of whether it's a football game where spirits are high and we're kind of expecting a fight with the other side, or even if in parties where everyone is having a good time. My peers and classmates that were related to the fofo, they were the ones that were usually the ones that were quickest to diffuse a situation. They were always so very smooth about it too. Maybe not the same thing that you were talking about, Rupeni, but I'm thinking that that might have something to do with class and rank within trickling down into personality traits of today's youth.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, and just before I wrote that, also there's links to, I mean, personality traits to genetic and also hierarchy, which is crazily insane. But also another thing that I also wanted to point out was that, okay, yes, surrounding could play a factor, family and other environmental factors, but to some extent, I think just like how cannabis also brings out that part of your brain, I think alcohol just brings out that side with that nature of people, and it shows. I mean, people of those who belong to chiefly ranks, they hardly get into physical confrontation, whereas those who are in the subordinate ranks would. That's it for me.
Ah, thank you for that. Anybody want to sound off on that? Okay, right on. Thank you so much for that, Rupeni. I wanted to pose a question to the right now. I mean, as see, we recognize this as by our name, the Twilight of Oceania, but we recognize that our cultures are either in a state of active preservation slash relearning, or are in a state of change, in modernization or westernization. So I wanted to ask if anyone has any stories or anything that they'd like to share regarding factors that might attribute to your culture either holding on to traditions actively or relearning traditions, or even factors that are determining why things are changing, and maybe not for the worse, maybe for the better. I don't know if you can make a case for either. Anything like that? Anybody? Rupini, go for it.
Right. So here in Fiji, we sort of going through the same thing also. Like I also speak to, like I also spoke to too. In order for tradition and culture to be preserved, it needs to be practiced. And yeah, yes, it floats along the lines of cultural appropriation. Uh, but at the end of the day, like you said, it needs to be practiced. And if not, it won't be relevant and it won't be practiced at all. A perfect example would be the lokovi. When you go in Fiji traditions, when you go and ask a girl's hand in marriage, you would take certain stuff with you, the whale's tooth from adapted from the Tongan culture, mats, kerosene, those kind of stuff. But right now, as we speak, the question is, do we still stick to those same protocols? Right now, I asked the same question when went to my cousin's Lokovi, friend's cousin Lokovi. What we took gas cylinders instead of drums of kerosene. And when I posed this question up on Twitter, people just went crazy. They said that you should stick to tradition and still take kerosene. I mean, like, for goodness sake, our ancestors didn't have kerosene back in the day. you know, we didn't even have whale's tooth to begin with. And the real question, the real thing, something I want to point out is that, okay, yes, let's keep tradition, let's try and keep it, but at the end of the day, we should also adapt to today's time. That is the only way it will be practiced. I mean, right now, to be honest, I think having a traditional wedding, having all these traditional ceremonies are very expensive. And I feel that a lot are not going, even towards the funerals. No one usually has the 4 nights or the 100 nights anymore. That's how bad it's gone. So all I'm saying is that in my opinion, I feel that culture and tradition needs to adapt to time now. If not, it will not be practiced and it will be lost. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents on it.
Two?
Just launching off from where Rupini left off with regards to like the practice of our ceremonies, yes, is getting more expensive. That is because the introduction of money has made it expensive, you might say. Because before, what we do is we just trade and then we take what we've gathered thus far. And for ceremonies, were usually conducted communally rather than individually. So, from a agrarian community, it was easier back then to conduct a ceremony because everyone owned an animal that they could give. So, say in a gathering, I'd say, "I'll tell my cousin to bring one of his cows. I'll bring a pig." and then we'll go together a for funeral or whatnot, and then we'd also take dalo from our own plantations, and that was what helped to move the to help feed people during the ceremonies and such. But now with the use of money and with the current lifestyle, it's really hard because, like I said, it's also the money and availability of these resources is make it really hard.
I agree. I noticed that even when it comes to food, things that were plentiful and cheap and easy to get a hold of 50 years ago are becoming more and more expensive to get today. And I feel like one of the most universal things that we all face with the changes happening is the popularity of Western pop culture. And I feel like it's become kind of a not right sort of twisted perversion of what it should be, of what it used to be. If we're going to be fixing that, if we're going to be practicing that, we have to put more time, less time into watching Beyonce videos and waiting for the newest albums to drop. And we have to spend more time talking within our spheres of influence about the changes and why they're happening and try to do something about at least understanding the why of it all. Um, One of the things that's been a problem for me that I've always had is my Fasamo is very weak. And it's something that my cousins had called me out on my whole life. I never did anything about it until just recently. I went online and I'd started to look up resources to try to sharpen my conversational level Fasamo. And I am, ashamed that it took me so long to care enough to do something about it because there is no excuse. And I feel like if I at nearly 40 can be in this position and still say I've got time, I have like I can to learn a little bit. I just need to put in the time. I need to put in the effort. If I can do that, I know that anybody else can. And so I don't feel like we're ever really at a point where we're going to lose who we are. But I like to think that when push comes to shove, we'll figure something out and hopefully not lose our cultures and our traditions. Doesn't look like it will anytime soon, but that's my hope. Rupeni?
Sorry, just on that note, I mean, in terms of language, uh, so what? So how do you define yourself to be a fully fledged Samoan, Tongan, or Fijian? Um, my question is, if someone, how do you actually describe someone to be a fully fledged Samoan, Tongan, or Pacific Islander? For example, if a person would not know their language, how to speak it, but follows all traditional and cultural protocols, would that still factor in, or what do you think?
This is a very loaded topic, and this is something that we have been touching on in the chat for a while. I think we should try to chip into this now. For my meager 2 bits, what we're talking about, what makes a Samoan, I remember having this conversation because a few years ago, I found myself in a position living in Samoa, lived on our family's land, taking care of the land, did what I could for as far as Fa Samoa was, as far as going doing Fa Lavalaves, and I felt like having the descent, being of Samoan ancestry, and living in Samoa on my family's land and taking care of my land, I felt like that was good enough to make me Samoan. But I'd had conversations with people to the effect that if you don't have a strong connection to the language too, if you don't speak the language, then some people will outright say you're not a real Samoan because you don't have the language. And some will say, well, of course you're still a Samoan, you've got the blood, but that's kind of a dark mark against you right there. It's not the best thing to be a Samoan and not be able to speak Samoan. So I had gone through with a few friends who were in the same boat as I am. I had several discussions with people from children to adults to my elders about what exactly makes a Samoan, and one of the things that I had gathered in my very informal questioning was that three things make a Samoan, and that's one, you have the blood. Two, you have the language, which is what connects us to our ancestors, and three, you have a connection to the land. There were more, there were other things, but to varying differences. But it essentially boiled down to those who I spoke to. It boiled down to those three things, and so I don't know how many Samoans would agree with that because everybody's different. Everybody has their own opinion. But I want to say I spoke to about 300 people altogether, and I want to say that was about the consensus among 70 to 75% of them. Take that with a grain of salt because it's not an official inquiry, but that's how I kind of look at being Samoan. But I know in the group chat we've had a lot of discussion, so I wanted to ask Malsi if you had made a few very strong, very poignant points about what it is to be a Samoan in this after everything we'd gone through. So I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to share some of that with us.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I think the biggest example of what it is to be a Samoan has to do with the tatau, because everybody who sees somebody with a tatau, the immediate response is that is synonymous with what it is to be the epitome of what it is to be a Samoan. Now, in Samoa, we have a saying that says, "Etamo moringugu." You have to be able to speak before you're able to get your tatau. And that was a big thing for me growing up, because when I was growing up, my grandfather, he epitomized to me what it was to be a Samoan, but he passed away when I was 8. And my father didn't really adhere to Samoan culture as much as he did. So coming up in Hawaii as a Samoan, I always knew I was a Samoan, but I didn't know where to go to find any kind of resources to provide me with anything other than anything other than what I already understood, which was very, 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 very basic. The language was very, very basic when I was growing up. It was mostly just, my father telling me what to do, whereas having a conversation with anybody in Samoan was very out of my reach. So it became my life's journey to to seek after the knowledge that would be synonymous with what it would take to have a tatau. And it was that journey to want to have a tatau that led me to become proficient at what it was to be a Samoan. Now, saying that again, you have a very different view these days of what it takes to get a tatau based on what the tufunga require of you, because nowadays it's not, when you go up to a tufunga and you ask them, do I have to know how to speak Samoan before I get my tatau? They'll tell you, oh, you can get your tatau first, and then you learn everything afterwards. And that's a role reversal completely from what I was taught growing up, because like I said, when I grew up, it was etamu nguktu taimine. Now they're telling you, you get your tatau first, and then you learn everything you need to know afterwards. But for me, when it comes to being a Samoan, you have all kinds of different examples of people who have, like you said, there's three things basically that would make you a Samoan: having Samoan blood, a strong connection to the land, knowing the language. I mean, you have a lot of people who are not Samoan blood at all, but they've completely assimilated to Samoan life. I mean, I have a friend who, he's born and raised in Samoa, speaks Samoan perfectly, but his father is actually from Canada. His father married a Samoan woman, moved to Samoa from Canada, and he's been in Samoa for the rest of his life. And he lived as a Samoan until he died. And my friend, maybe 2 years ago, went back for his father's funeral. But who's to say that that Canadian man wasn't Samoan, because he served his whole life in Samoa? There's a plethora of different ways of looking at it. But to me, I think the biggest thing is to realize what keeps our Samoan identity in harmony in Samoa, and who keeps that in balance. Because I think one of the biggest examples is Candyman. I mean not Candyman, Handyman. I don't know if you know Handyman over there in Tisa's village.
No, his name is
Tisa,
Candyman.
yeah,
Candyman.
Candyman. Sorry, yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
that's a great example right there.
So Candyman is a Palangi man who's been in Samoa for many years by now. They've recently him and Tisa got married, and he's got a tau. But every time you go through Alenga, we've drove through there a few times, and he's standing outside doing the sa. You know, just like every other Samoan. In fact, there's a lot of villages that don't do it anymore, but you see Candyman doing his thing out there every night. So you know, there's like you said, there's a lot of different interpretations of looking at it. We like to say opinions, but like there's a lot of different interpretations of what it is to be a Samoan. And to me, the biggest thing is keeping the harmony within the village. Whoever is over there making sure that the village continues to work in its facility that it needs to work at. That is what a true Samoan is. And you know, sometimes we have to do our jobs from outside of Samoa. Like I'm here, you're here, and you know, even though we're not in Samoa, whenever our family comes, we take care of them and we make sure that when they go back, they're prepared to face everything that they can back at home. And I think that's the big. I think the biggest things are being one educated on what you need to know if it ever falls into your lap to be responsible for that. And then the second thing for me is, you know, being educated in all the protocols to, you know, not just to do your own thing, but when others come to visit you, you have to be educated in the protocols to receive those people who would come to visit. Know how you're connected to this person and that person, and what it would take to respectfully address those people, and you know, and to know your place too, because sometimes people will come and try to take advantage of you when they think that you don't know your role. But if you stand strong on your own 2 feet, those are the things that'll distinguish you from everybody else. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Very quickly, two things. Just on that last bit that Maoshi was sharing, in Fijian, we have a saying for that. That's Wangara tor kamure numuyat, meaning find, hold on to, and follow what you're supposed to do in life. But with regards to the question, I guess I can just sum it all up in one word, and that's home. Like where you've considered your roots to be. You could be planted here in Fiji, and your roots could be here in Fiji, but you grow your fruits out there in the US and whatnot. But if you consider Fiji your home, or wherever it is that's home, that's where you belong. Like that's where you have a right to be called from. And you will, and I believe that no one will just go and claim a place where their heart doesn't tell them it's their home. Because if you feel in that heart, that part of you that beats, that's home, then nobody can take that away from you. So yeah, your language could be a little rusty. Your knowledge of the language could be rusty, and the traditions and all a bit rusty. But if that's where your heart beats for, then my friend, that's where you're from.
Right on. Okay.